Can you imagine a criminal so feared that even the most hardened inmates dread his presence? Picture a man whose very name sends shivers down the spine of anyone who hears it. These inmates do exist, death row inmates whose crimes are so heinous that their existence in prison is a constant reminder of pure evil. Get ready as we reveal the most feared inmates on death row of all time, Ted Bundy.
You are not guilty.
I'm not guilty. Does that include the time I stole a comic book when I was 5 years old? I am not guilty of the charges which have been filed against me.
Ted Bundy, a name that sends chills down the spine, was one of the most feared serial killers in American history. His charm, intelligence, and good looks masked the monstrous nature hidden beneath. Born on November 24, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont, Bundy's early life appeared ordinary, but his actions would later reveal a deeply disturbed individual. Bundy's method of luring his victims was as cunning as it was terrifying. He often feigned injury, wearing a cast or using crutches to appear vulnerable and gain the sympathy of unsuspecting women. Approaching his targets in public places like college campuses, parks, and shopping malls, he would ask for help with simple tasks, such as carrying books or loading items into his car. His victims, perceiving him as harmless, would willingly assist, unaware they were stepping into the clutches of a predator. Once his victim was within reach, Bundy would strike swiftly. He was known to strike them with a blunt instrument, often a crowbar he kept hidden in his Volkswagen Beetle. He then bound, gagged, and incapacitated them before driving them to secluded locations where he would commit his heinous acts. Bundy's crimes often included sexual assault, followed by murder. His preferred method of killing was strangulation, which he performed with a chilling calmness. What made Bundy particularly terrifying was his ability to blend in seamlessly with society. He was a law student, worked on political campaigns, and even had a steady girlfriend. His ability to lead a seemingly normal life while committing such gruesome crimes baffled both law enforcement and the public. Bundy's clean-cut image and articulate demeanor made it hard for people to believe he was capable of such brutality, allowing him to evade capture for years. Bundy's reign of terror finally ended on February 15, 1978, when he was arrested in Pensacola, Florida. Bundy spent nearly a decade on death row, where he continued to manipulate and deceive. He confessed to over 30 homicides, but the true number of his victims remains unknown, with estimates ranging much higher. On January 24, 1989, crowds cheered as Bundy's life came to a grim end in Florida's electric chair. John Wayne Gacy.
When they paint the image that I was this monster who picked up like these altar boys along the street and swatted them like flies, I said, this is ludicrous.
John Wayne Gacy, known as the Killer Clown, is one of America's most notorious and feared serial killers. Born on March 17, 1942, in Chicago, Illinois, Gacy led a life marked by disturbing duality. By day, he was a respected community member, a successful businessman, and even dressed up as Pogo the Clown to entertain children at parties. By night, he transformed into a sadistic monster who preyed on young men and boys. Gacy's method of luring his victims was both manipulative and calculated. He would often cruise the streets, bars, and bus stations of Chicago, targeting young men who were either down on their luck or simply looking for work. Offering them a ride, a job, or a place to stay, Gacy would gain their trust and bring them back to his suburban home. Once inside, Gacy's demeanor would shift. He would use various ruses to subdue his victims, such as handcuffing them during a mock magic trick, or overpowering them physically. Gacy then subjected his victims to horrific acts of torture and sexual assault. His basement became a chamber of horrors, where he would tie up his victims, often using a rope trick that he called his handcuff trick, to strangle them. What made Gacy particularly terrifying was the stark contrast between his public persona and his gruesome crimes. As Pogo the Clown, he brought joy to children, but behind closed doors, he harbored a monstrous secret. His ability to lead a double life, fooling those around him, instilled fear, not just in the community, but across the nation. Gacy's neighbors and friends had no inkling of the horrors taking place in his home, showcasing his ability to blend seamlessly into society while committing unspeakable acts. Gacy's killing spree lasted from 1972 to 1978, during which he murdered at least 33 young men and boys. The chilling reality of his crimes came to light in December 1978, when a teenage boy named Robert Piest went missing after last being seen with Gacy. Piest's disappearance prompted an investigation that led police to Gacy's home. What they found there was beyond anyone's worst nightmares. During a search of Gacy's house, authorities discovered a crawl space under the house where Gacy had buried the remains of his victims. The stench of decomposition filled the air as police dived deeper into the space, ultimately recovering remains from 29 of Gacy's victims. 4 more were found in nearby rivers, where Gacy had disposed of them when he ran out of space in his crawl space. Gacy was arrested on December 21, 1978, and his trial began in February 1980. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and his defense, which hinged on an insanity plea, failed to convince the jury. On March 13, 1980, Gacy was convicted of 33 murders and sentenced to death. During his time on death row, Gacy maintained a bizarre sense of normalcy, continuing to paint and even giving interviews in which he denied his guilt. His paintings, many of which featured clowns, became a macabre collector's item, further cementing his notoriety. John Wayne Gacy was executed by lethal injection on May 10, 1994 at Stateville Correctional Center in Illinois. Gacy's final words, "Kiss my ass," displayed his unrepentant nature even in his final moments. Aileen Wuornos.
Okay, I cannot go in the execution chamber and die in the execution chamber as a liar. Yeah, and I gotta come clean that I killed those 7 men in first-degree murder and robbery. As they said, they had it right. A serial killer.
Aileen Wuornos, born Aileen Carol Pittman on February 29, 1956, in Rochester, Michigan, led a life marked by hardship and abuse long before she became one of America's most infamous serial killers. Abandoned by her mother at a young age and raised by her abusive grandparents, Wuornos experienced a tumultuous childhood. By her early teens, she was living on the streets, turning to prostitution to survive. Wuornos' path to infamy began in late 1989, when she embarked on a year-long killing spree across the highways of Florida. Unlike many serial killers, Wuornos' victims were not lured by charm or deception. Instead, she chose men who picked her up while she was hitchhiking and offered her money for sex. Her victims ranged in age and background, but all shared a common fate at Wuornos' hands. Wuornos claimed that she killed her victims in self-defense, stating that they attempted to rape or harm her. Whether these claims were true or a justification for her actions remains a matter of debate. Armed with a pistol, Wuornos would shoot her victims at point-blank range before robbing them and fleeing the scene. The remains of her victims were often found along the highways, stripped of their possessions, and left to be discovered by passing motorists or police. Wuornos' crimes sent shockwaves through Florida, as authorities struggled to identify and capture the person responsible for the string of murders. The randomness of her attacks and the fact that she was a woman, rare among serial killers, added to the public's fear and fascination. The idea of a lone female drifter capable of such violence shattered societal norms and expectations, making her all the more terrifying. Wuornos' downfall began when police traced items stolen from one of her victims to pawn shops, where she had sold them using her own identification. This critical mistake allowed investigators to identify her and connect her to the series of murders. On January 9, 1991, Wuornos was arrested at a biker bar in Port Orange, Florida. In custody, Wuornos initially denied any involvement in the killings, but eventually confessed, providing graphic details of her encounters with the victims. In total, she received 6 death sentences, solidifying her fate on death row. Aileen Wuornos spent over a decade on death row. On October 9, 2002, Wuornos was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. In her final statement, she expressed a desire to leave the world and promised she would return. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker.
Why on earth would you have hurt those people? Why did you kill those people?
No comments. No comments. I cannot answer that at this time.
I think most humans have in them the capacity to commit murder. It is not because...
No, we don't, Richard.
Ricardo Leyva Munoz. Ramirez, known to the world as Richard Ramirez, was born on February 29, 1960, in El Paso, Texas. Raised in a troubled household, Ramirez's early life was marked by exposure to violence, drug use, and dark influences. His cousin, a Vietnam War veteran, showed him graphic photographs of Vietnamese women he had raped and murdered, further distorting Ramirez's perception of violence and morality. Ramirez's criminal activities began with petty theft and escalated to burglary. By the early 1980s, he had developed a profound interest in Satanism, which became a recurring theme in his later crimes. His fascination with the occult, combined with his growing addiction to drugs, set the stage for a series of brutal attacks that would terrorize California. Ramirez's killing spree, which began in 1984 and lasted until 1985, was characterized by its sheer brutality and randomness. His victims ranged in age from 9 to 83, and his attacks were marked by extreme violence, sexual assault, and sadistic rituals. Ramirez had no specific target profile, choosing his victims at random and breaking into homes in the middle of the night. What made Ramirez particularly terrifying was the unpredictability of his attacks. He would break into homes in the dark, assaulting and murdering his victims while they slept. His methods included shooting, stabbing, bludgeoning, and strangulation. Often he would leave satanic symbols at the crime scenes, further heightening the fear and panic among the public. Ramirez's ability to evade capture for so long added to the terror. He moved effortlessly through neighborhoods, leaving a trail of horror in his wake. His seemingly supernatural ability to disappear into the night earned him the nickname, the Night Stalker. The end of Ramirez's reign of terror came through a combination of luck, community effort, and diligent police work. On August 24, 1985, a fingerprint left in a stolen car linked Ramirez to the murders. In September 1989, he was sentenced to death, with the judge stating that his deeds exhibited cruelty, callousness, and viciousness beyond any human understanding. Richard Ramirez spent the rest of his life on death row at San Quentin State Prison. On June 7, 2013, he died from complications related to B-cell lymphoma, a form of cancer.